Well, it's a new day, and where I left off, I got that fiberglass panel, flipped over, and we got all that sanded down, and that turned out really nice. I think I'm going to be able to reuse that. And then I took that piece, laid it over top of the plywood, used it as a template for cutting out the new coring material. And this is it. I spent a little bit of time getting it cut, or getting a dry fit up in place on the deck. And one thing I noticed is that there's a little bit of camber to that upper helm, or by camber I mean it's a slight arch going from port to starboard. And being a 3/4 inch plywood, it's a little stiff. It didn't want to flex down into place. So what I'm going to have to do is make some shallow relief cuts on the bottom side of this new panel, so that'll allow, I guess, the outside edges to kind of flex in a little bit. So I'm going to be doing this using my skill saw, and I've got the depth of the cut on this, or for my saw, set at 1/2 inch. So if you remember, we're cutting 3/4 inch material, so that should leave me about 1/4 inch of solid wood on the top surface. And I think that'll also give me enough relief on the bottom so that it'll flex down without really having to put a lot of weight or stress on it. So let's go ahead and make these cuts. And again, I want to make sure that I'm cutting this on the bottom side of the panel. And just to make sure I don't screw this up, I even came through, because this is going to be the top. I even made sure I didn't cut on this side. I've got to cut the bottom side. So let's flip this over and make our cuts and try another dry fit. All right, so I think this is going to work out really well. You can just kind of see here, not taking much effort at all, and there's a fair amount of flex in here. More than what I'm going to need for this deck. Like I said, it's just a very slight camber. So I just made most of my cuts on the outside edges, and I did run one right down the middle, just because. I don't know why. I probably didn't need to, but it made me feel better, so I did it. So let's get this cleaned up, put it back up on the deck in place, and see how it lays. See, this is where I was having a hard time having it lay down. Now it's dropping in perfect. And again, at this corner over here, this is it's not quite as, it's a little wider through here and not quite as long, so it's a little stiffer than the other side, but there's still enough flex in here, so everything looks good. I can actually stand on it now again. So here's what I came up with for securing these panels down, or this panel down. I more or less made some, little makeshift cleats just out of, I think I'm using 1/2 inch plywood here. And I'm screwing into the part of the deck that we did not touch. And I've got a piece of hard, dense plastic as a bit of a shim over top of the plywood. And by screwing this down, it creates a bit of a fulcrum, forcing the new coring material down into place. Similar setup there, as well as there, and lastly, on this back corner. So in total, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pressure points, and mostly focusing on the outside edges, just because that's where the camber on the deck is. So by forcing the outside edges down, that's going to give me a nice even pressure right through the middle. Words are not coming out today. So I've gone ahead and dispensed all the epoxy that I'm going to be needing to put this in place. At least I think I've put out enough epoxy. But I put it in 2 different containers. One, I've got one small batch that I'm going to be mixing with the 403 additive to go ahead and fill in all these relief cuts that we put in here. And then I've got another batch, larger, that I'm going to be mixing straight with no thickener to actually wet out the bottom side of this panel. And for putting these into the grooves, I'm just going to be using a plastic trowel, more or less, and really forcing it in there. All right, I think that looks good. Now I'm going to go and mix up another batch. It's going to be thickened to about the same consistency that I'm going to be used for putting in a bed inside this area here. FYI, a 1/2 inch of epoxy sitting in one of these tubs will melt the bottom. It gets so hot. Now when it's sitting in a tub this thick, you got to work kind of quick until you can spread it out into a thinner layer. Yeah, just like that. All right, so now I'm done with the gooey stuff. These gloves are coming off, and I'm going to screw my cleats down. Well, it's been about 3 hours now since we laid down, or since we epoxied down this coring material, and the epoxy has set up. It hasn't cured, but it's set up enough to where I was able to come back in and pull off all of my clamps that I used to hold the edges down. I was able to remove those, and this coring is not going anywhere now. It's not fully cured, meaning that, so now that what that means is that I can come in with some more epoxy and fill in any little gaps that are running around the perimeter of this core, and then as that kind of weeps down around the corners and touches the epoxy that we use to secure this coring material, it'll all just chemically bond all together. So that's kind of the time window that I was hoping to be able to work with. West System 404, their high density filler. It kind of looks like talcum powder, but I guarantee you it's not talcum powder. All right, and this is a very wet mix, which is exactly what I'm looking for. I want it to be able to ooze or weep down inside these thin little cracks around the perimeter of the core. So this is a good mix. Let's start pouring. And I'm just going to use a plastic putty knife, just because I wasn't able to just pour it into the little gap. But I'm using a little knife to kind of push it around and work it into the groove or into those little cracks a little bit. I've gotten all of the edges are all filled, and the wood has been pre-sealed. Now, in case anybody's wondering why I'm pre-sealing the wood before I put my fiberglass down, is if I didn't, and I were to just come in with over dry wood and lay down my thickened epoxy, put this fiberglass cap back down, what will happen is that the plywood will actually pull the resin into it'll pull the resin into the wood, and I would be left with a dry bond, or a dry layup, I guess. So by coming in and pre-coating this, it'll prevent that from happening, so that I'll get a good solid bond, which is what I'm shooting for. So, so now I'm going to be coming in and doing my mix using 403 filler. And I'm going to make this about the same consistency as I did when I put this panel down a while ago. And at that point, I'm going to be putting my fiberglass skin back down and securing it with some screws and some fender washers until it tacks. Then I'm going to back those screws out. So this is exciting, because after I get this down, then I get to go home in about an hour, I guess I get to go home for the night. And it's already like 8 o'clock. And it's time to call it a day. So let's get this bad boy down. Spread the schmutz around. And I'm hoping that I'm going to actually get a little bit of squeeze out around the edges after I get all this clamped in place. All right, my friends, we've gotten everything secured. So that is a wrap for the night. I'm just gonna let this set up a little bit, tack over, and then back my screws out before everything completely sets so that I'm not snapping screws off in the morning. So, good night.